This is Fictitious, a podcast about writing and genre storytelling, presented by Nerd for a Living. I'm Adrian Buskey. In this, our second episode, I'm joined by novelist Rebecca Zanetti. Rebecca is a very prolific author of dark paranormals, romantic suspense, and contemporary romances. She's published more than 25 novels, many of which have appeared on bestseller lists from the New York Times, USA Today, Apple iBooks, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble. Her books include the Scorpius Syndrome series and Realm Enforcer series from Kensington Publishing, and the Sin Brothers series and Lost Bastard series from Grand Central Publishing. Her latest novel, Lethal Lies, was released in May. It's the second in her new Blood Brothers series, with the third volume coming in November. We talk about how Rebecca keeps such a rapid release schedule and her career path from lawyer to novelist. We have a really interesting discussion on testing different kinds of book cover art for multiple genre audiences, and we explore her writing methodologies, software, and organized approach to pantsing her novels, and how she recovered from a tech failure that lost 25,000 words of a novel just a week before a publisher deadline. Rebecca, first off, thank you so much for joining us on Fictitious, and thank you so much for being on our How to Be a Nerd for a Living panel at Emerald City earlier this year. It was a super fun panel, and we had a lot of writers on that one with you and Sam Sykes and Alvin Bell and Lauren Shippen, and it wasn't writer specific, but that one just ended up being very writer centric, and it was a lot of fun, and we were excited to get you on board with that. Do you do a lot of speaking at shows?
I do a lot of panels and workshops, and I've just started doing keynote speaking, which is totally different than the workshops and the panels. So I speak a lot. I hadn't intended to. When I sat down to write a book, I didn't think that the public speaking and the meeting people and the traveling would be part of the gig, but I've enjoyed it. It has taken me by surprise a little bit, but that's okay.
A lot of times when they first get into their creative pursuit or their side hustle, in their mind, they think, I'm doing that thing, like whether it's writing or it's making comics or it's making music or whatever it is. I think when you're first jumping in, you don't realize how much of it is about promotion, how much of it's about the business of it, and how sometimes it becomes, the public persona of going out and presenting yourself, in public, whether it's standing behind a table at a convention, greeting potential fans or meeting your actual fans, or being up on stage. So, how much of your time gets taken up with that kind of travel and, in support of the books and speaking and stuff now?
Quite a bit of it, probably maybe a third of the time the last couple of years, which is good. It's just, a lot of writers are introverts. A lot of creative people are. And so you have to learn how to balance your nature to go hide under a desk and be by yourself and talk to actual people and be able to communicate. And not only that, you have to learn how to enjoy it. And I think once you do, then it gets easier.
Yeah. I think that, like you said, like if you have that introverted nature, and I don't want to misrepresent introversion, because for a lot of people, some people take that to mean shyness. Other people understand it as like it's you recharge on your own and that you need your own quiet time in order to get yourself back to center. So, there are a lot of, introverted people who are really great speakers and are great on stage. But that certainly, I think, is like some people may relish that opportunity to be on a stage. I'm one of those people. I love being there. But yeah, I think a lot of writers are like, no, I chose this because I want to be in my cave and I want to live in my head all the time and put it on paper. That's an interesting aspect of like that being part of the career path these days.
I agree. And you do learn to enjoy it, but you have to take care of yourself. You do get energy from other people. When the fans, you have 300 fans coming at you at a book signing, you do get that energy and electricity. But then after a while, you have to go be by yourself and rest a little bit and recharge, like you were saying.
You write like romantic suspense and dark paranormal and contemporary romance. So you're kind of across a number of genres, but there's, sort of related thematic there, I guess. What kind of shows are you going to? And what does your fan base look like? The kind of demographic, the people that you meet at the shows that are enthusiastic about your work.
It's really interesting because I almost think that I have two fan bases that do cross over a little bit. The paranormal romance fan base is very strong when it comes to ebooks and audiobooks. And they show up at like the Romantic Times convention, which is huge. And they show up at the RWA, Romance Writers of America convention. and some of the smaller regional conventions. And then I have a romantic suspense fan base that reads more of the suspense, and they read more in print. So they're buying the books at Walmart or Target, at Barnes & Noble. And so it's interesting to see, we're trying to combine the two, obviously, and create a bigger fan base. But it is a different, so far, we do a lot of A/B testing on Facebook and see, who responds to which ad. So it's been fascinating to watch. My demographic's pretty wide. It's the romantic suspense is probably 60% female, 40% male, a little bit older. The paranormal is primarily female. A lot of working women, moms, stay-at-home moms. I meet people from all over the world, so it's fascinating. And romance is the biggest seller of all the genres, so you have the ability to hit so many people with these different subgenres. So it's a lot of fun. It's fascinating.
Well, previous to my career in media, I worked at, I guess, 4 different bookstores, like while I was in college and stuff like that. And granted, it's been 20 years ago now, but, so I kind of was before the ebook era and stuff. But in that time period, something I did notice a lot was that romance readers are voracious readers. I mean, when they would come in, I would have regular buyers who would come in every week and buy a stack of books. And these were people who would go through 5 to 9 to 10 novels in a week. And you could really plow through stuff. And they bought a lot of books. They passed on those books to other people. There was kind of like an exchange sort of going on all the time. And so, I think that's a really interesting market because, like you said, it's like the best-selling genre because that audience just devours stuff. Do you find on your end that they are always looking for new voices? Are they, is an audience that stays like really devoted to the authors that they love best, or are they curious to discover new ones?
I think they're both. I mean, because we can only put out so many books at a time, and these readers need something else to read. And even with all the social media, all the marketing, everything we have going on, when I ask people, okay, how did you hear about my books? It's always, oh, my sister told me about them, or my friend so-and-so, or my lady who does my hair. It's still word of mouth. So when we recommend other authors, somebody will say, okay, I'm waiting for your next book, but I need something to write now or to read now. Who do I read? And we recommend somebody. It's a good way to, introduce new authors and get them out there. And I find the same thing. I'll get emails from readers saying, hey, I've never read you, but Lexi Blake just mentioned you on her blog, so I went and bought your backlist. And so, I send Lexi Blake a thank you card.
Word of mouth is still, like a 1-to-1 recommendation, I think, is still the most powerful thing out there. As a reader, I talk to my reader friends all the time and we're always discussing, oh, we should be reading this, or I haven't heard of that. And sometimes those things happen in unlikely places. Being in a Barnes & Noble a week ago, I was talking to the clerk about the podcast we listened to. Yesterday, in an interview with the showrunner for Lucifer, I was talking about the books that we read. So, you find those conversations happen in interesting places. But, you mentioned something there. You're talking about like you can only put out so many books. You can only release so much stuff. But so your new book, Lethal Lies, just dropped May 16th, yes. I think. And that's the second in a series. But I was looking up the Blood Brothers series, and I think that's a spinoff from, or an offshoot from another series that you do, Sin Brothers, right?
Yes, it is.
But the first one in this particular series, Deadly Silence, came out in October. You dropped the second book in May, and then the third one's scheduled for this coming November. So you've got 3 novels in the space of a year in that one series.
Right.
And to me, that's crazy pants. Just for sheer volume of stuff that's coming out. Because most writers I know have a hard time getting one novel out the door. Or, if they're juggling a couple of series, maybe 2 a year or something, and they're full-time writers. So, how are you keeping that kind of pace to get those books out?
It sounds like a cliche, but I write fast. I have actually 5 full-length novels releasing this year and a few novellas. And there are writing years, there are release years, there are promo years. And I used to kind of hide how I write because it sounds a little crazy, but when I write a book, I write a book. I'm in that book. I don't do the 1,500 words a day over a series of months. It's just not how my brain works. And so I've always read very fast, and then I went to law school and I learned to read faster. And I think that all translated into writing fast. And I'm fairly ambitious, so if the book's done, I want to get it out there. I'm not very good at sitting on anything, so it just works. And so for the first several years, I have 2 publishers and I have a couple of agents. They were always trying to caution me and slow me down a little and say, no, we've seen so many authors burn out. We don't want you to burn out. And I think by this time they just realized that, everybody has a different process and this is how I write and I'm probably not going to burn out. But then, of course, now they think maybe I won't burn out. So the contracts are coming like crazy. And now I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I may want to take a month off. So, be careful what you hope for.
That pace, like you said, everybody writes differently or approaches things differently and balances their time, with different methodologies. But when you dive into a book, I mean, you're just one novel. That's the entirety of your focus. You're not like splitting it between other stuff. You just get one and done out. Or do you bounce around?
Well, I try to only be writing, as in creating a new book at a time. But, when you have two publishers or sometimes I have three publishers, edits are going to show up. And you got to switch gears, but I switch gears completely. I don't like write the book for a while and then edit another book. If I'm editing, I'm just editing that book and then I go back to writing. So I separate it that way as much as I can, but I try not to write two books at once. For me, it's just too hard switching gears like that, especially since I write in different genres.
Yeah, I could see that could cause some bleed, like you having to, basically change hats, so to speak, as far as like, getting your headspace in one or the other.
Yeah, you can't have a vampire show up in your, romantic suspense detective story. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that would throw you into like Twin Peaks category, where like just somewhere along the lines, like, oh, we're a supernatural thing now.
Yeah, by the way.
Yeah, why not? Well, tell me about Lethal Lies then. So, I mean, it just came out May 16th, so it's just been released, and it's the second in a series, and it's a spin-off. Is this something that people like really need to have read the original like Sin Brothers for, or does Blood Brothers stand on its own? Like, what's the kind of recommended reading for that?
Blood Brothers has to stand on its own to be a spin-off series, to be a new series, and to be picked up by the bookstores. It has to stand on its own. But if you want the complete background, the first four stories in Sin Brothers, they do set up the next three books. And there are a couple of Easter eggs in the new books that you won't get if you haven't read the first few, but you also don't need to get them to enjoy these books. But I do get emails from earlier fans of the series going, I had no idea this was going to happen, which is kind of the goal. So yeah, basically these guys were genetically created by a crazy scientist to become the ultimate soldiers. And they broke free, but there's a clock ticking over their head and only have so much time to survive. So how they survive is kind of the stories. And of course, fall in love because they're a romance. But there's a lot of suspense.
How do you balance that? What I always think is interesting is that, if you watch TV, we know that there's genre TV, but romance is always a significant part of the stories of things we watch. But that doesn't ever seem to be something that people look at television shows and go, oh, that show that I really like has some people getting together. That's not my bag. But like rom-coms, we see in movies, like that's a sectioned off kind of thing. And not in books, we see people say like, oh, romance is over here and I don't do romance, even though read any fantasy, read any literature, read anything. It's a natural part of the human condition. So how do, like, when you go into these kinds of things, do you balance that? How heavy of this is romance? How much of it is suspense? Is there like a leveling point in your mind where you're like, I get, these elements just right to balance out?
It's more of an overall book arc, so if you have a romance in any book, and frankly, I think Dean Koontz writes great romances. And most people look at me like I'm crazy, but I love the romances in his books. You have to have the romance arc where the people meet and they end up together at the end. But you have to have the suspense arc where you have the twists and the turns and the good guys and the bad guys. And at the end, hopefully the good guy wins. And somehow they just go together and you just put them together. And if there's too much suspense for a while, you can look at the page. And I use Scrivener. I don't know. Are you familiar?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, I like Scrivener because it has the color coding that you can put on the side. So I color code the chapters. So if it's a suspense-filled chapter, it's one color, and romance is one color, and the hero's journey is one color. And if I look over there and there's no romance, no red for several lines, I'm like, oh, I need to go in and put some sort of connection in there. And that doesn't mean sex. It means any sort of connection that furthers the romance. So that helps me, that Scrivener, very simple color coding, helps me make sure I have enough of all the different elements. And I think romance sometimes gets a bad rap. People who don't realize they're reading romance or look back and think romance is the 1970 pirate with a woman with her shirt half off and, no real story behind it. I'm always surprised when I get an email from somebody saying, oh my gosh, I loved your book. There was a plot. I'm like, of course there was a plot. That's kind of the point. So, I think a lot of people are actually reading romance and they don't realize it.
Yeah, well, like I said, I mean, it's a natural part of the human condition, and we expect that, those elements to exist in most of our storytelling. It's just that when it comes to the forefront, then there are people who are like, oh, that is not my thing, not my genre.
Right.
And I mean, like last year, there's an author that I had interviewed named Mary Robinette Kowal, and I had read her novel Ghost Talkers, and I feel like anybody who follows me knows I'm beating a dead horse here, but that's not a novel I would have normally picked up, but we had gotten her onto a panel and we were sent a galley copy, and I wanted to know what I was talking about before I talked to her, so I started reading it, and then I just tore through it, and it was like technically like period supernatural romance, I guess. It's kind of, I wouldn't even say that the romance aspect of it was the biggest element of it, but it certainly, if you were marketing to me, it's not the novel you would put in front of me as a reader. And it was one of my favorite books of last year. I mean, I absolutely loved that book, and I'm so happy to have it on my shelf now. So, I think that's the challenge of getting in front of new readers sometimes, is convincing them that whatever your genre limitations seem to be, there are great stories taking place in areas that maybe you hadn't looked before.
Well, and we've started to look at that from a different marketing perspective. I don't know if you noticed, but Lethal Lies actually has two different covers. The trade paperback has the woman that looks very suspenseful running, or actually in front of a lake. And the ebook and mass market cover has a male soldier romance type on the front. And so we're actually trying to market the same book to different markets, and it's working. It's really interesting to see how people are picking them up and liking it and hopefully buying the other books, whereas they may not have done so with the other cover.
That's really interesting. Thinking about that, like when I go to the bookstore or even when I'm looking online and stuff, for me as a reader, a cover that has like a photo cover, if you have like some sort of like actual like model depiction of a character, is like an enormous turnoff to me. Yeah. I immediately turn away from those books. Like it just don't like it. Whereas something that has like a really interesting graphic visual or like, some kind of design element, I'm a fan of commercial art and graphic art in general. So that makes sense for me. And I love comics, but I don't necessarily always like full on character depictions either, so it's really interesting to kind of find those people that it taps, because it's looking at somebody like, I want to say Kim Harrison, like her books almost always have that sort of photo, like kind of cover. And I think there's another one called The Iron Druid that I started reading, and I remember like the character on the cover did not look like the character inside the book, when they started describing it. And so I was immediately had that dissonance of like, that's not him. So why is that guy on the front? He's just pretty.
That's right. It does happen.
So how did, when you guys do that, I mean, like you said, that's kind of like A/B testing to kind of discover what people get into. And I love this. I mean, I honestly like hearing this aspect of the business, because this is the stuff that I don't think a lot of people think about. Like cover reveals are a big deal in social media for writers, because it's the stuff people get excited about. Bloggers love to share those things. It allows you to get a lot of advance buzz out for the books. But yeah, like the cover really does affect how people feel about the work. So when you guys are planning that out, how did you come to that conclusion, and how did you start making those decisions on those covers?
My publisher is Grand Central forever, and it was them. It was my editor and the sales team, the editorial team, and the marketing team. And I think they looked at the numbers, and they looked at the industry, and they thought, why don't we try this? And so, kudos to my publisher for taking a risk and spending some money, because, creating two covers in two different formats of the book with trade and mass market, that's a big deal. And so it was the publisher who came up with the idea and did it. I had some input on the covers, but mainly, yes, I like this, or no, I don't like this. But it really was Grand Central and forever, the romance line. So, they're trying new things and they're taking risks, and I like that.
Well, and I like that you point out too, like the difference between like the trade paperback style and the mass market. Various readers have a preference, towards one or the other. Like people, again, the voracious readers who tear through 5 novels in a week tend to like the mass market size, and they also tend to be brutal with them. Like I see, people like fold those books over. It's crazy, or stick it in a purse or whatever, and so it kind of goes everywhere. Whereas I feel like the audience who likes a trade paperback size or quality paperback or however the industry likes to refer to it. And they're treated a lot more like hardcovers, I think, where like there's a little bit more reverence for it. Me, I'm a big dude. I've got big hands, so I like that bigger size. Little mass markets, it makes me feel like a kid reading a book again. Like I can't do it. But how do you handle that then on like Amazon or Barnes and Noble or iBooks and stuff like that? Like having those two different versions. How do you get those in front of the right audience?
Well, different promotions, different e-blasts, and they're both up there. So if you click on the trade cover comes up. If you click on the mass market or the Kindle, that cover comes up. And then sometimes you have different cover for the audio book too, because you may have sold those rights separately. So I imagine it's pretty interesting for the reader. But if they find the book, they find the book, and then they can click on whichever format they want. We were really worried when we did it that we would confuse readers, that they would see the two covers and go, wait a minute, didn't I buy this? Didn't I? Wait, I haven't had any fan emails or comments on Facebook or anywhere that there's been any confusion. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if we're getting to an era where particularly people who buy a lot of stuff on Amazon or get a lot of things in ebooks are just become savvy enough to understand those differences. There are certainly moments where I find products that will confuse me a little bit, and I'm a pretty veteran Amazon shopper. But at this point, I know to click through things and find the right thing that I want. So I'm hoping that, people are getting savvy about how that stuff works. I want to jump back for a second. I love that you're talking about Scrivener, because I think, in writer circles, the question that comes up all the time is, what software do you write in, or like what's your methodology? Some people are writing entirely on paper, some people are in Word. It makes my head explode. Like I'm a Scrivener user, but I didn't know you could color code. You just mentioned that, and I was like, and granted, I am only a working on the novel person. I haven't gotten to that real level of stuff yet, and I know that I'm only scratching the surface of what all that system can use. Other people find Scrivener way too complicated and like there's too much going on. So I'm just really interested to know like what your workflow is in general. Like, are you an outliner? Are you a pantser? How do you handle it?
I am a complete pantser without question, which is why the color coding really helps me once I look back. I'm sure I don't come anywhere near using everything in Scrivener that I could use, but I use it for the color coding. I use it also because you can move things around just with the sidebar without losing anything. There's no cutting and pasting, which in Word I've done and I've lost stuff. And so I really like that. You can also take notes to the side, and you can put up a picture, to the right of any scene you're working on. That kind of helps you describe that scene. So there are also character sheets that you can fill out, which I don't, but I know a lot of people do. And a lot of people do use the outliner in that, people who outline. So I think it's a great program. It works for me. And so even though I keep it pretty simple, that's what I need, because I am a pantser and I just sit down and write.
I do like the character sheets. I find those to be pretty useful. But the thing that I do love most, like you said, is that ability to write things in pieces, keep them individual, and then rearrange that outline. Because even in like short stories and things, like, I've had those moments of being like, oh, that scene would make a lot more sense placed a little bit differently in the timeline. And also, like, I think it's interesting the way the filing structure works, because I can do a lot of versioning, where I can be like, okay, I'm going to pull this one out of the timeline because I don't know that it actually works, or I'm going to make a big edit to it, but I want to hold on to that original version because there might be something that I want to explore from that. And it's really easy to kind of tuck things away, but still have them there. I
agree. You don't want to lose anything. It's great deleting once you're ready to delete, but you don't want to lose something, because we've all lost thousands of words and gone, oh no, how am I going to hit that deadline now? That happens.
Are you backing up to the cloud? Like what is your kind of methodology for making sure you preserve all that stuff?
Well, I compile and go from Scrivener to Word anytime I write a significant chunk. And then I email it from myself to myself. So it's in 2 email accounts. And then I also use Dropbox.
I think somebody who's just getting into stuff might think about that and go, oh my gosh, that sounds like an awful lot. But this is your baby, and rewriting, you never get back something that you've written and lost. It's gone. You can attempt to, you might get the gist of it, but, you'll never get that turn of phrase back that same way. So that makes a lot of sense. I like that. Scrivener does do a nice job of doing zipped backups. Like every time you save or every time you close. And if you do have Dropbox set up, then you can automatically be uploading that to the cloud. But yeah, I know, other authors have talked about the fact that at the end of every day, they immediately print out everything that they wrote that day just to have a hard copy. But yeah, whatever those redundancies are, like, it's really, really important.
Well, you usually do that after you already goofed up. I lost 25,000 words of a book one time that was due like in a week. And it was my fault. I had an old laptop and there was a storm going on and one of my keys got stuck and I used a knife to pry it up and the knife hit something electrical. I mean, it was totally my fault. But 25,000 words is a lot to lose.
Yeah.
I've been real careful since.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a third of a novel just vanished into the ether.
Gone.
Yeah, I could imagine that was a bad night.
That was a bad week.
How do you recover from something like that? Like what, and like especially because you said you're going up against deadlines. So, I mean, did you have to buckle down and just recreate everything? Or, I mean, how did you do that?
I buckled down and I recreated everything. And what I did is I told the story from the opposite point of view. So each scene usually goes back and forth. So I flipped them. So I kind of wrote a new story in from the other point of view just to keep myself interested in going. So it actually turned out to be a good exercise. It turned out to be a lot of fun, but it didn't feel like fun at the time.
Yeah, that's amazing advice, though, because, yeah, like trying to recreate something you've already written is dull and I think it takes the sheen off of it.
Yeah.
For me, like, I love the editing process because for me, the hardest thing is the initial brain dump. I mean, I could do it, but like, I don't enjoy it as much as refining. I like going back into the thing I've already got and tweaking it and making it better. But the process of completely recreating from scratch on a blank page sounds maddening to me. So that idea of flipping the script a little bit is super fun. I also think that's a good idea for when people get stuck.
Yep.
You know, if you find that like a scene is not working or a chapter isn't going how you want it to do, it's like, you know, change the perspective and you might find that there's something more interesting going on in somebody else's head.
Yeah, that works. That definitely works. I do that too.
So are you mostly like a third person limited POV typewriter, or like structurally, like how do you usually do that with your books?
It's third person, multiple POVs. I do have a series that's first person that I'm just working on now, but usually, especially with a romantic suspense, it's nice to do third person and get the multiple point of views, especially the bad guy. I love writing the villain. I love writing something from the villain's, point of view. So, it's just fun.
Yeah, I like that too. Like, I feel like so many books put the villain at a distance, and psychologically, I think usually they're the most interesting person there. And so when they're always hidden behind some veil of obfuscation, I feel like you're actually kind of doing a bit of a disservice, because there's so much fun to be had in finding out what makes them tick. And also, I mean, a villain with like that, you're not developing out that way, I think rings a little hollow, and you don't have as important or exciting a narrative as you would have otherwise.
I agree. And you have to humanize them a little bit, or they're just not interesting and they're not scary. If they're not human, if they don't have weaknesses and strengths, they're not scary, as weird as that sounds. You're not really threatened by them, and you want them to be threatening, and you want them to have a chance to win. Otherwise, where's the suspense?
Right. Yeah. You don't want it to be like the little kid's classic comic book where the good guy is completely inevitably going to win and the bad guy never really offers much threat at all.
Right.
It's incredibly boring. But also, like, I feel like if you don't get more perspective from the villain, people will tend to lean on really basic bad guy tropes. And so it'll be we have to justify how the bad guy is bad. So he did all those things that we see all the time, and they're cliche, sometimes gross, because we, encounter that same thing every time, like with like it's sexual violence or something like that, where it's like what we always lean on to be like, we need to make sure we know they're bad. So here's the stuff that they do, and it's frustrating to see people go back to the well that often. When you're thinking about your characters and informing them and, bringing them to life, are you a researcher, or do you deep dive into anything that helps, bring those characters to life, or is it mostly just from your own wellspring that you're pulling them out?
It depends on the book and the series. I have a series that is called Scorpius Syndrome, which is a post-apocalyptic book. And so I had to do a lot of research for that on what the experts think what will happen if something goes wrong, if there's a virus or bacteria. And so in doing that research, it did inform the characters, because they had to be people who'd A, survive, who's going to survive, and B, people who would be able to contribute to saving everybody at some point. So that did take research. I do research anything psychologically that might be going on with a character. The character will get PTSD, so I need to know something about it. And then you just go from there. A lot of it is your imagination, which is why it's fun to do this.
You know, like some people get very touchy when it comes to psychological issues, or, I mean, a person who has anxiety will be very conscious of like whether or not somebody gets it right. Somebody who deals with psychological issues or whatever, a mental illness, can be understandably like very sensitive about how those portrayals are made. So it can be difficult, and it's very rough when you read something very tone deaf. And I think that happens a lot in works that from people that I don't think necessarily, it's not malicious. They're writing from their own experience, but their experience is limited. And so, they might describe something or give their view of something that isn't informed very well, and can be, especially in the pitchforking social media age, it's really easy to bring out the grumpy whenever that stuff happens.
I think as a writer, though, you have to step away from that, and you have to not, and I'm sure this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but you can't worry about that. I mean, you could line 10 40-year-old women from the Pacific Northwest up, and 10 of them have anxiety. It's going to be different for every single one of them. Yeah. And I have anxiety. I mean, I think a lot of creative people do, but the experience is going to be different. So you're never going to get somebody else's true experience right. You can only do the best you can, and you're making all of this up anyway, because your only true perspective is yours. So I don't think, and especially in this day and age, people are so worried about getting it wrong. They're not doing it. They're not trying it. They're not putting different characters into their books because of social media, and they're going to get skewered. And I just don't think you can think that way. I mean, I think you have to do your best with a book, your best with the characters, and tell a good story. And that's really all you can do.
I agree. There's a danger, I think, in this day and age that people will be so afraid of getting it wrong, or so afraid of alienating an audience, or getting attacked by people who are not their audience. And it can be really hard to challenge yourself or push further, because somebody will always disagree with whatever choices that you've made. And I think sometimes the thing that we forget is that growth is important for all of us, and that if we're making the attempts and we're trying to go further, we may not get there all at once. And there's a certain pressure to be perfect to everybody, which is impossible. It's difficult, but it's, to write good fiction, you have to look difficult things in the eye and challenge them.
Try. You have to take a risk. I think I learned that lesson really early. It was like book 5. And I had a heroine who was a vegan, and she was very passionate about being a vegan. And I got one of the meanest fan letters I'd ever gotten from this woman who was furious at me. How dare I put my ideals on society? How dare I push this agenda? And I wrote her back and I said, lady, I had a cheeseburger for lunch. I'm not a vegan. The character is. And she wrote another mean letter. And then like a week later, she sent me this email saying, you know what, you're right. I'm sorry. My husband and my best friend was a vegan, and she stole my husband.
Oh, yeah.
So that for me as a lesson was, half the time, people take what they want, and their reaction to your book or your work is really a reflection of what's going on in their lives right now, yes. Even with reviews, so you just got to do your best with your book and not listen to the rest of it.
Whether you're on Goodreads or Amazon or wherever you're at, or even in blogs, it's like, it's kind of important to, one, to kind of like find reviewers that you can respect their opinion, and that, have a developed point of view that meets your own needs, from a critical standpoint, but also being able to suss out which people have invested a lot of themselves into that review or that critique, or because everybody brings their own baggage to the table. And it is always funny to me every time that somebody points at an artist of any kind and says, how dare you put an agenda into your art? It's the single most ridiculous statement that I see from people who live in the fan space, is that they expect the works that they get to be pure entertainment with no messaging or no exploration of theme. And because it's invisible to them until it offends them. I had a good friend who would get really upset watching a children's movie with his kids that had an environmental message or something in it. Like a Wall-E or something like that. Like, how dare you politicize this thing that was made for kids? So it's like, one, politicizing the idea of like trying to take care of a planet seems very, very odd to me. No stories are without message. No stories are without meaning, or if they are, they're not much of a story.
Right. I agree. And yeah, I agree. And you have to tell the story you want to tell. And, not everybody's going to like it. Not everybody has to buy it.
Right. I always feel like good for you, not for me is a perfectly fine standpoint.
Yeah, me too.
I sometimes have to remind myself if I I'll read something that got, a bazillion glowing ratings and it doesn't work for me. or like a film or something else, and I have to stand back and be like, I can't actually be objective, I know, but within my own, subjective viewpoint, I have to recognize that, like, maybe I'm not the demo. This wasn't made or created for me. Maybe my own set of interests conflict with this particular piece, but it's perfectly fine if other people enjoy it. I just need to remove my emotional connection to that, because it's not an attack by anybody else on me if they like it and I don't, or vice versa.
Right, I agree.
And fans can get really weird, but like you don't like that thing that I like, you hate me. They take it very, very personally.
I do.
I want to take a minute to tell you about another of our shows, the Nerd for a Living podcast. Nerd for a Living explores the lives and careers of people working in pop culture and genre entertainment, and the often winding path that's taken them to where they are now. Nerd for a Living has featured interviews with people like Stranger Things star David Harbour, Supergirl stuntwoman and American Ninja Warrior Jesse Graff, Ildi Modrovich, showrunner for Fox's hit series Lucifer, original Ghostbuster Ernie Hudson, and many, many more. We talk with actors, directors, producers, choreographers, writers, and beyond. And we have a big archive of interviews across a wide variety of genre entertainment industries, so there's really something for everyone. Check out nerdforaliving.com for all of our episodes, and subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, or wherever you enjoy your podcasts. With the little bit of time we have left, I want to circle back to your personal story, because you mentioned earlier that you were a lawyer, and the jump from lawyer to writer, and particularly a writer of romance and paranormal. People that are like, I was a doctor and I started writing novels about doctors. I was a lawyer and I started writing courtroom dramas, stuff like that. This is a less predictable path. So how do you make that jump?
I think you would be shocked by how many romance authors are former lawyers. We're everywhere.
Really?
It's really, yeah, we're everywhere. Practicing law is a lot like writing a book. You're trying to convince somebody of something using as few words as possible. It's a very similar skill set. And a lot of us have this great desire to learn, and law school is all about learning. You know something at the end of every day that you didn't know at the beginning of the day. Practicing law is a little different than that. You're actually adversarial, which a lot of us don't like to be adversarial. And so I think the ability to write, you also learn through law school. It just was almost a natural transition for, I think, a lot of us. It's a lot more fun to write a book than to be in the middle of two fighting people or corporations or whatever. I don't know why so many lawyers become writers. I think a lot of us want to be writers in the first place, but we look for a practical way to use our knowledge or our skills, and we end up doing what we were meant to do anyway. So I definitely enjoyed law school, and I enjoyed being a lawyer for a while too, but it was nothing like writing. I think I took a lot of career paths. I was an art curator and of a private collection. I didn't save the art. I just traveled with it and collected it. And I was a Senate aide, and I was also a hearing examiner and a college professor. So I think everything kind of commingled into what I really want to do is write. And I get bored easily, which is one of the reasons I'm a pantster, not a plotter, because then there's no time to get bored.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. Well, before we wrap up, the last thing I want to know is just what stuff are you feeding your brain with right now? Whether it's what you're reading or what you're watching, like what's the stuff that's like getting you excited about storytelling?
Okay. Well, I read everything I can get my hands on. So I go to these conferences and I get books. I've been reading a lot of middle grade stuff. And I've been reading Sarah Prinius lately, the urban fantasy. But TV-wise, I just finished Sci-Fi had 12 Monkeys on, and they showed the whole season in one weekend. So I just finished that, which I don't know if you've watched the TV show.
I haven't yet. It's on my list. Yeah.
It's good. It is really out there, really good. And then I watched The Killing on Netflix.
Also on my list and haven't gotten to yet. Yeah.
That one's good too. Well, what have you watched lately?
I am right now in the middle of The Magicians, so another sci-fi series.
Oh, that's on my list.
It's so good. I really liked the first two novels from Lev Grossman, but they're a little difficult sometimes because all the characters are kind of dicks. And in the TV show, they still are, but there's something about the charisma of the actors that really brings it home. It's a strangely edited show at times, but it's a lot of fun, and its look at magic in modern day is really entertaining. I'm a big fan of Lucifer. And that's a fun show because it meshes procedural and like elements of cop stuff with dark horror. It comes from the world of comics, and yet it's an exceptionally funny show. The characters are really, really entertaining and fun. And then, I've got a backlog of stuff I'm trying to get to. The Expanse, also in sci-fi.
Love The Expanse.
The novels are fantastic. And the writing combo that James S. Corey, that's Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank, I mean, those novels are brilliant space opera. Daniel Abraham also has a fantasy series called The Dagger and the Coin.
Oh, really?
Yes. It is so, so good.
I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. When people will talk about, like, they're always looking for, like, the next Game of Thrones, or they're looking, whether to adapt or just something to read. Dagger and the Coin, I think, is so great. There's the first novel in it is called The Dragon's Path, even though there's no dragons in it. But the path is actually a little physical thing in the story. And it's really kind of political, character driven. There's action, but that's not really the point of it. In a fascinating world. And so it's probably, other than maybe like Abercrombie's novels, the best fantasy, like straight ahead fantasy that I've read in quite a long time.
Oh, well, I will definitely check that out next. And it's funny, what you're watching is on my to watch list. So
yeah.
But The Expanse I had watched, I devoured that. So I've seen all those episodes. I'm ready for the next season.
I saw the pilot and it was brilliant. I can't wait to dive into it more, but it's like, I'm a binger. So for the most part, I only watch a few things like in regular broadcast, and I don't find that I have a ton of media time. And I'm like a total poly nerd. I like absorb like everything. And so I'm always bouncing back and forth. So it's like, it's about finding like that time where I'm like, okay, this is the next thing that I'm gonna, like, it's like the Marvel shows, like on Netflix or something. Like I want to eat that alive in like 3 or 4 days and just get all of that story in my head.
I do the same thing. I mean, I'll write a book, and it's constant, it's 10,000 words a day. And then when I'm done with it, I'll go binge watch something, a whole season of something, just to regroup a little bit. So I do the same thing.
I think it's like it's a pressure valve. I think you have to kind of blow off steam from that. It's interesting to me, like you said, like 10,000 words a day, which I think is, I mean, my brain spins with it, but I'm a gear shifter. Like I like to do 5 different things in a day. I don't do it as well now that I'm older. When I was in my 20s, I was like a total multitasker and could do 17 different things in a day and feel fine in it. At 39 now, I don't make that shift nearly as well as I used to, but it's still an ingrained reflex, I think. I need to learn how to focus a little bit more. Rebecca, this has been great. And I really love this dive into like the idea of the marketing stuff and looking at like, what your process is. I mean, I think that stuff is so valuable to our listeners. Lethal Lies is out now. Twisted Truths, book 3 in the series, comes out in November. The Deadly Silence was the first one out in October. You've got over like 25, 35 something novels, like a lot.
Yes, a lot.
For somebody who's discovering your work now, what's the best entry point other than this new series? What's like, where would you say this is where to start to really get into the Zanetti experience?
If they're interested in dark paranormals, I would start with Fated, which is the first book in the Dark Protectors. If they're interested in romantic suspense, I would start with Forgotten Sins, which is the first book of the Sim brothers.
And that's all Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Everywhere.
Everywhere books are sold, as the commercials used to go. Oh, and one last question. How does being an author with the last name that starts with Z affect you in marketing?
Well, there was some concern when I first started, when I first sold, that the Z would be a problem because we'd be on the bottom shelf, in a bookstore. And my response was, well, buy an end cap then, because let's do it. So actually people, they remember the name, even if they don't remember Zanetti, they remember the Z. They find it, which is nice. And it's really my name, so it's easy for me to remember. But it's been fine. It's nice at the big multi-author book signings where we're alphabetical order. I'm always either at the end so people can find me, or I'm at the very beginning if they flip it so people can find me. So I'm never stuck in the middle. So that actually has worked out pretty well.
And where should people follow you? Where are you at on the Twitters and online and stuff? I'm
on Facebook, Rebecca Zanetti. You just Google me, and there I am. I'm also on Twitter and Pinterest, and I have a website, RebeccaZanetti.com. So I'm easy to find.
Awesome. This has been great. Thank you so much for joining us on Fictitious.
You bet. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Fictitious. Rebecca Zanetti's Lethal Lies, Book 2 in the Blood Brothers series, is available now online and in bookstores. The home for Fictitious and all of the Nerd for a Living family of podcasts is nerdforaliving.com. Go there for our full archive of episodes, sign up for our mailing list, or send us a message with your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Fictitious is now on Twitter under the handle FictitiousPod, which is a great way to keep up with updates from the show, plus genre, writery news, and discussions. And I'd always love to hear about what you're reading and writing, so come chat with me at my Twitter handle, Adrian Buskey. If you haven't already, subscribe to Fictitious on Apple Podcasts or Google Play, and if you're digging the show and want to help support us, one of the best ways is to write us a review. I know every podcast asks for this, and it's with good reason. Ratings and reviews help other listeners discover our show, help us gain advertisers, and help bring you more conversations with exciting writers and creators. This podcast is produced by Wendy Buskey with sound design by me, Adrian Buskey. Fictitious and the Nerd for a Living family of podcasts for the ambitious geek are a production of Armadian Media and Entertainment. Now then, author friends, get back to writing.